Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, 29th November 1935. Swami Yogananda and four others arrived at the ashram. During a conversation with Sri Ramana Maharshi, Yogananda asked, "Why does God permit suffering in the world? Should He not, with His omnipotence, do away with it at one stroke and ordain the universal realization of God?" Maharshi replied, "Suffering is the way for realization of God." Yogananda asked, "Why should there be suffering?" Maharshi replied, "Who suffers? What is suffering?" The conversation between Paramhansa Yogananda and Ramana Maharshi reflects profound insights into the nature of suffering and its relationship to spiritual realization. Yogananda, representing a seeker's perspective, raises a timeless and universal question: why does God permit suffering, and why does He not eliminate it entirely? The question stems from a dualistic outlook, where God is seen as an external, omnipotent creator, capable of intervening in human affairs to eradicate pain and bring universal realization. The question arises from a compassionate and logical standpoint, where suffering appears unnecessary or contradictory in a world governed by an omnipotent and benevolent deity. Maharshi's response bypasses the theological or moral framework of the question and points directly to a deeper experiential truth. Suffering is the way for realization of God. Here Maharshi asserts that suffering serves a purpose in the spiritual journey. Rather than being a flaw in creation or an arbitrary experience, suffering acts as a catalyst for self-inquiry and realization. It compels individuals to question the nature of their existence and the source of their pain. Through suffering, one turns inwards to seek liberation from the very condition that creates it. Maharshi's response shifts the focus from an external resolution to an internal transformation. The question of why suffering exists becomes secondary to the opportunity it provides for transcending duality and realizing one's true nature. Maharshi's follow-up questions dismantle the premise of the original query by inviting the seeker to introspect deeply. Instead of providing an intellectual or philosophical answer, he redirects attention to the experiencer of suffering and the nature of suffering itself. Who suffers? This question draws attention to the illusory nature of the ego or the individual self that claims ownership of the suffering. By investigating the I that suffers, one may discover that this sense of individuality is a construct and that the true self, the eternal, unchanging consciousness, is untouched by pain or pleasure. What is suffering? This question challenges the seeker to examine the essence of suffering. Upon inquiry, suffering can be seen as a mental construct tied to identification with the body-mind. Once the identification dissolves, the experience of suffering loses its grip. By posing these questions, Maharshi does not dismiss suffering, but transcends it, pointing to the root cause, ignorance of one's true nature. The initial question presumes a dualistic framework where God and the world are separate, and suffering exists as an external phenomenon. Maharshi's response dissolves this duality by suggesting that the true self, God or consciousness, is ever present and unaffected by worldly phenomena. Suffering exists only so long as one identifies with the ego and the phenomenal world. Maharshi subtly communicates that the resolution to suffering lies in self-realization rather than external intervention. The omnipotence of God is not in eradicating suffering externally, but in offering the inner capacity to transcend it through realization. Maharshi's response encourages seekers to turn inward and question their assumptions about suffering and individuality. This practice of self-inquiry is a direct path to realizing one's true nature. By understanding suffering as a tool for spiritual growth, individuals can shift their perspective from resistance to acceptance, using challenges as opportunities for inner transformation. The questions who suffers and what is suffering remind seekers to disidentify from the egoic self and recognize their deeper, unaffected nature.